Canada's budget watchdog is warning the federal government could be heading for a $250 billion deficit between the 1-2 punch of COVID-19 and the emergency spending and weak oil prices. The parliamentary budget officer says this year's shortfall might add up to $256 billion. It's a timely assessment coming one day after the Prime Minister confirmed our reporting by announcing the feds will deliver an economic update next month. Let's hear now from the parliamentary budget officer himself, Yves Giroux, joining us. Thanks very much for being with us this morning. And we were talking with my Bloomberg colleague, Theo Argydas, this morning, highlighting that compared to where you saw things in April to where things stand today, on the economic front, there have been improvements, but on the spending front, we have seen more spending. Just give us a sense of how you would characterize things today.
That's a very fair assessment. So compared to our April 30th scenario, the economy has, I wouldn't say improved, but fared less bad than we expected, especially when we saw job numbers for April. There's much more uptick in the economy than we expected at the end of April. And so the economy is not in as deep a hole as we expected it would be, in good part as a result of better or higher oil prices than what we saw in April. But on the other hand, the government has spent more than we had anticipated at the end of April, notably as a result of these various measures that are announced almost on a daily basis by the Prime Minister and ministers. So in all, it means that the deficit that we see for the current fiscal year has gone from $252 billion to $256 billion. So it's almost as if the better than expected economic outcomes has almost entirely been taken up, and some more by additional expenditures by the federal government.
Mr. Giroux, obviously, when we talk about what's been going on, there are all sorts of unprecedented numbers that we cite, and certainly in the assessment you've done, we're talking about some record numbers. If you had to summarize this deficit picture in one word, what would it be?
Massive. So it's a massive deficit, something we've never seen in this country, and certainly as a share of GDP, we're headed to a number, even if you take as a share of GDP, something that we've never seen in peacetime for sure. So as far as a series can go, we will reach a deficit as a proportion of the economy that is we've never experienced. So it'll be necessary for the government to ensure that the measures they've put in place are indeed temporary, so that we can return relatively quickly to more reasonable levels of deficit of 1 to 2% within a few years.
Okay, this update obviously gives us a sense on how you see things playing out. You had also spoken with us recently about your desire to see some kind of update from the federal government to talk more about the spending. And of course, this week, yesterday, we saw the Prime Minister confirm our earlier reporting around an update that the government will provide next month, early next month, the Prime Minister characterizing it as a snapshot, if you will. What was your reaction to what the Prime Minister announced?
Well, my initial reaction was one of relief. I was reassured and relieved that the government will indeed provide an accurate picture, as much as can be done, of the state of the nation's finances. And also I was hopeful that the update would also include a plan, so the government's plan going forward. But subsequent comments by the Prime Minister and ministers suggest that we may not see as much details as one would expect in a normal update. So, for example, when the Prime Minister keeps referring to a snapshot, and some commentators saying that it could well be just an addition of the measures taken so far and the state of the economy so far, without any sense of projections for the next couple of months. If that were to be the case, that would be somewhat disappointing to just have an addition, a simple mathematical addition of the expenditures so far, because that we can do pretty easily. The government publishes these regularly. So what we expect and we need as Canadians is to have a sense of the the priorities of the government going further or going into the future for the next several months to a year. What is the government planning on doing when the restrictions related to the pandemic are gradually lifted and the economy returns to the new normal? So if it's just a snapshot without any sense of what will happen or what the government plans on doing in the future, that would be disappointing.
And if that ultimately is the case, is that the kind of thing that in theory could impact next time we check in with you for analysis on what the deficit picture looks like? Could it be the difference between, this massive deficit as you describe it getting even bigger, or perhaps something different than that?
It's quite possible. For example, if the update includes the measures, or at least an idea of the magnitude of the measures that the government still intends on taking to kickstart the economy, to ensure that it's picking up as quickly as possible, then we would have a better sense of the deficit for the current year. But if the government is silent in its update on July 8th, then it would be much more difficult to get an accurate picture of what the deficit could be. So the $256 billion figure that we have released this morning does not include any measure to stimulate the economy once the restrictions are lifted. So if we were to get a sense of the magnitude of these measures to stimulate the economy in the update, we'd get a better sense of what the final number for the deficit like. But in the absence of any such details, we'll be left with still a guessing game as to what the deficit could look like. And I don't think it's beneficial for Canadians or parliamentarians when they have to vote on these measures to not have these kinds of details.
Mr. Giroux, we only have about 30 seconds left, but looking at your analysis, it does look like you expect to see more improvements in the job market, which has been obviously hard hit. How much of the COVID-19 uncertainty puts some of that job creation, some of that return to normal for the economy up in the air?
It's a lot of uncertainty. So we have seen a return to reopening businesses at different pace across the country. So it's a lot of uncertainty on the COVID-19, because if there are eclosions or resurgence of cases across the country, that could all be put on hold. So this creates a lot of uncertainty in the return of the job market to what will be the new normal.
All right, Yves Giroux, thanks as always for your time. Yves Giroux, Parliamentary Budget Officer, joining us with the PBO's latest assessment on where things stand on the fiscal side.